So, if anyone was any doubt that we live in like an Armando Iannucci serial rather than any kind of existing reality, it's all we live in a simulation, right? This is proof that we live in a simulation because Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, has compared himself to J.K. Rowling. I shit everybody not. I mean, I say I shit everybody not. If you're watching this segment, you're probably already well aware of this, but I digress. In the most, like, what the fuck moment I think of all time, um, Vladimir Putin has said that Russia has been cancelled like the wizard lady has, which is it kind of beggars belief, really. But anyway, this is what he said.
Didn't begin yesterday. We know this very well. In Hollywood, they avoided films even when they made films where the only winner, the country that defeated fascism, was the United States, and didn't say anything about the Red Army. But if you look at the number of military units fighting in the east, that was the Russian units. So they just canceled the contribution of the Red Army into the defeat
But well, the Soviet Union aren't Russia, by the way, Vladimir.
over the Nazis. And in Japan, they don't even mention who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or they just say it was done by some abstract allies.
What? No, they. I think most people would understand that it was America that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
And the fact that it was the United States who did such an awful slaughter at the end of the war, this fact is not even mentioned. So they just cancelled cynically this truth. They cancelled Joan Rowling recently, the children's author. Her books are published all over the world, even just because she didn't satisfy the demands of gender rights. They're not trying to cancel our country. I'm talking about the progressive discrimination of everything to do with Russia, this trend that's unfolding in a number of Western states with the full neglect or sometimes encouragement of Western cultures. They're now engaging in the cancel culture. They're even removing Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich, Rachmaninoff from posters. Russian writers and their books are cancelled. There's now the latest program to cancel world literature was conducted by the Nazis in Germany 90 years ago. We remember.
It beggars belief, doesn't it? Now he is correct about one thing, and that the desire to just like disassociate with anything like vaguely Russian is obviously stupid, right? Like you can prize pathologic from my cold, dead hands. Like people saying, "Oh, you have to not buy Coca-Cola because they won't stop trading in Russia," right? Sure, that's one of a singular reasonable point that he's made here, right? But outside of that, the idea that his imperialist invasion of a sovereign territory is somehow in some way analogous to somebody being cancelled is pretty absurd, to say the least. Like, no, you're not cancelled, you're just people are opposing the fact that you're a war criminal, Vladimir. I don't know if you noticed the whole war criminal thing that you've been doing and how people have disagreed with the whole killing civilian stuff. Seems less than ideal. I don't know why my camera is screwing up again. Okay, good, we're back. But yeah, but it's clear what he's trying to do here. It's very clear that his main thing to do here is try and essentially try and usurp blame for himself when speaking within his own borders, right? This is an internal claim within Russia to say that to try and cover up the fact that his own failings as a leader has led to, and his own, capriciousness as a leader has led to the invasion of Ukraine, that he sold to his own public as being in the benefit of the Russian people to denazify the Ukraine area and liberate the Donbass, right? That's the kind of thing he's pushing to here. Whereas, obviously, we already know that he shares his view on transgender people that he calls like an insult to humanity. That's clearly, in the same kind of realm as people like J.K. Rowling, which is, I'm assuming, why he picked her specifically there. But it's incredibly funny, watching all the UK journalists like melt down over all of this. Like, they have no idea what they're supposed to do. The J.K. Rowling, right, has been endorsed by the worst person in the world. Literally, there are 7 billion people in the world, and of all of them, the worst possible endorsement that you could have as like an online turf has to be Vladimir Putin, right? Of all the people it could have been. And they just like him espousing just like a similar viewpoints to that of a mainstream UK journalist in the Guardian has to sting a little bit. And so now they're essentially engaging in like the most absurd mental gymnastics to try and absolve themselves of any blame here, and just say, oh well, if you try and make any assertions about what's happening here with Putin and Rowling, then you're playing into his hands. You can't talk about this at all, because if you do, then you're doing what Putin wants, as if this is some kind of 5D chess game that he's engaged in, with which to try and sow discord amongst the West. I mean, like, he's done that already just with the whole invasion thing, regardless anyway. He doesn't need to, like, why would he spend time doing a televised address from the presidential office, specifically with which to try and inflame some intra UK war between gender criticals and trans people? It's some part of like 5D chess game to sow division. It doesn't make any sense. Like, again, the level to which they have to obfuscate this issue to absolve themselves of any guilt of having the same view on gender as a guy who the man who is incredibly obviously homophobic, right? It's the Caroline Farrow incident all over again. And it's incredible the level of like the level of copium that they're engaging in here, to try and make it like that it's not just incredibly obvious that it's all born out of the same social conservatism, Vladimir Putin's derision of transgender people, and the ways in which the gender criticals and the journalists that do their bidding are trying to lobby for changes in law to make lives worse for trans people as well. It's very, very clear these are all torn from the same piece of cloth. Just the liberals that call themselves kind of progressive, but they're just liberals, right? They're just only one step removed from Putin, because those people are kind of pro LGB rather than pro LGBT, right? But it's still born out of the same kind of innate disgust for trans people, rather than any kind of actual proper genuine utility that is gained from engaging in the anti-trans stuff that they're doing, right? Which it's just this kind of absurd situation, this simulation we were living in, where they have to do this. Like, where's some? Let me just have a look for some of like the have a look at the COPE people have been engaging as. There we go. Yeah, you look at this shit. Where Billy Bragg saying Putin's reference to J.K. Rowling being cancelled challenges those gender-critical feminists who claim to be arguing from a left-wing perspective. It does not trouble you when you see who's amplifying your signal. Like, literally, Putin calling trans acceptance a crime against humanity. And yet all of the media outlets clearly backing up J.K. Rowling on what she's saying, as if they're all just like cut the same cloth. Like, is Putin not the same person who is deriding wokeism? Right? It's all the same thing. It's all exactly the same thing of people wanting to smear socially progressive people, right? And people will say, "Oh, well, I also happen to know that Hitler drank water," right? Hitler drank water, so you can't claim that, just because I drink water that makes me as bad as Hitler. I thought, well, you both drink water for the same reason, which is because you need to be able to sustain yourself by drinking it, because that's part of how you materially survive. Whereas, in the same way that Mohammed bin Salman wants to change towards renewables, because we both agree changing towards renewables means that the planet isn't going to burn up. Right? That's the reason why. The reasons that these beliefs are shared between those two people aren't because of some level of innate bigotry. Whereas When you look at the trans issue between TERFs and Vladimir Putin, the reason why they have the same views is because they're both, disgusted by trans people, because they both think that it's a crime against humanity. Obviously, the TERFs will kind of cloud their, the points that they make in this kind of faux concern of what's going to happen to women's rights, when really it's mostly only just driven. If you look at any of the data, it's mostly driven just by just pure derision for the trans existence, right, and just pure disgust. I mean, I understand they probably have deluded themselves into thinking that they're just doing it for pro-women's rights because that's what the media has fed them, a lot of, especially of the smaller ones, right? But the reason why they're so susceptible to their arguments in the first place is because they are disgusted by trans people. They just think, they just think men in dresses or whatever, or women wearing hoodies or whatever. Just like it's just this innate disgust rather than any kind of proper understanding of the issues, right? A war criminal is calling validated trans identities a war crime. Even if I were a gender critical person, I'd say it was the pot calling the kettle black. True. Like, the fact they can't even get, engage in, a modicum of introspection on this issue is incredibly telling. Like, they're not having the "are we the baddies" moment that they really should be having. And there's a reason why these people continually get retweeted by Matt Walsh, Lauren Southern, Ben Shapiro, Richard Spencer, neo-Nazi Richard Spencer, very famous neo-Nazi Richard Spencer has retweeted J.K. Rowling, right? It's very simple who the bedfellows they have, and there's a reason why evangelical Christian groups and far-right fascist groups are funding the gender-critical movement, right? There's a reason why these people are bedfellows, because they're cut from the same cloth. It's not, there's this idea that it's somehow, I mean, as I said before, I said earlier in the stream, right? The full concern for women is not necessarily a feminist issue, right? There is a specific kind of concern for women that is a feminist issue, but there are plenty of people on the far right who will use a concern for women as a way to launder their real views, right? So, as I said earlier, obviously there's been a previous segment for YouTube, but I have to make the statement again, so I have two segments to do. Is that far right people use the "what's going to happen to the women" as a smokescreen for their racism, right? So people, like, the way in which they try and allude to the idea of black men being thugs because they might endanger white women, or the Rochdale grooming gangs thing was never talked about from the far right perspective about the agency of the girls in particular, but it was about brown men raping white girls. That was why they had such an issue with it. They used faux concern for women to launder their racism, rather than just understanding the utility of people getting raped is bad. That has to be through the lens of white women getting raped by brown men is bad, right? In the same way that their real viewpoint here is that trans women are bad, but they launder it through trans women are a threat to women because of hypothetical slippery slope I've invented in my head with no data to back it up. That's the same thing. It's the exact same kind of rhetoric, and it's why these people share these very, very similar views. I think saying that they only care about what their view of degeneracy is not entirely true. You take care of yourself, Oscar. Good night. I'll catch you on the next one. Appreciate you dropping by as always. I think there are plenty of them who, the people who are driving the issue from a kind of media lens, almost certainly have what they view. They are laundering their disgust for trans people through the lens of caring about women or caring about misogyny, right? Definitely, I would definitely say that. But I think there are plenty of people on the ground who have been taken in by the rhetoric, who still genuinely believe they're fighting for women's rights. Because there's so many lies, so many half-truths, so many smears that have been perpetuated by the media apparatus that exist with which to continue this narrative, like women, the danger to women in prisons, or the danger of self-ID, or the danger of allowing trans women to use refuges if they've been victims of sexual assault themselves, right? These are all things that I can theoretically understand why people are scared, because the worst thing that you can do is not empathize with TERFs, right? Because you can clearly empathize with a lot of the issues that they have. So for example, like Suzanne Moore was the person we were looking at with a tweet earlier. She's very clearly understood and has plenty of articles that she's written about how in the UK rape is basically de facto legal. It's so difficult to prosecute, it's so difficult to prove harm, it's so difficult to prove anything in court that the vast majority of people who rape get away with it. Because it's impossible, it's just, lots of it, so much of it is just, he said, she said. And this is real trouble that we have incredibly low convictions for rape because of this. So living as a woman is incredibly dangerous. And societal misogyny hasn't gone away, it's still there. In fact, I'd say, it's almost gotten worse in recent times, right? Now, all of these things have led women to be scared. I'm scared, not just of existing as a trans person, but of existing as a woman, because you don't know what men are going to do. Like, you feel threatened 90% of the time because things are that bad. What it's like being a woman in this country right now, right? And so it's very, very easy to then get caught up into a Twitter storm about what you perceive to be something that could theoretically make that worse. If someone uses, any kind of domestic abuse that you've engaged in, or you've had dealt out to you, like I have, or people who've been raped or been assaulted, it's very easy to then use that same fear with which to then promote your hatred of trans people. By focusing, that's why they're so obsessed with penises, because it's the only real thing that links cis men and trans women together. Some trans women, I guess, is the existence of the penis, and they focus on it so much that it's a way of scaring people by saying the appendage is the problem. It's nothing to do with any kind of societal conditioning. It's nothing to do with any kind of some kind of social paradigm that prioritizes misogyny, right? Because those things exist in what feminists always should be fighting against, right? But they have to focus on something that doesn't necessarily make that much of a difference, which is the scary penis, right? I don't think they understand what HRT does. Like, if you understand what HRT does, you'd realize it's not a threat in any sense of the word, right? And yeah, you're right. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved in going through the rape diagnosis, the rape rape conviction as well. It's incredibly difficult to prosecute, which makes it essentially de facto legal. If you're not going to get punished for it, it's basically legal at this point. Like, what are you going to do? And so these things are dangerous. But I understand why TERFs are scared, but none of the data bears that out. You can find a bunch of anecdotes saying this trans woman did a bad thing, but then again, I could give you a bunch of anecdotes of this cis woman did a bad thing as well. And then would that be evidence that all cis women are a danger to women, like all cis lesbians? Absolutely not. That'd be incredibly lesbophobic to do so, and it would be untrue. Like, it would be completely untrue for me to just say, here's a lesbian, here's a couple of lesbians who, sexually assaulted women in women's prisons. But, those minority do not represent the majority. Absolutely not. 100%. So to use that as a stick to beat the entirety of minority community with, that is bigotry. By finding these incredibly rare occurrences and extrapolating them further than the scope that they actually give. And that's true. A lot of the anecdotes don't really hold up with scrutiny. When scrutinized, like the WI Spa incident, where people were like, this person apparently exposed himself, even though, like, they didn't really. But they have a bunch of convictions for sex crimes, when actually all of those sex crimes they were convicted for were plea bargains they had to take with which to avoid being convicted for sex work charges, which could have put them in prison, right? So it's incredibly difficult to be able to get through like the barrage of misinformation or of disinformation a lot of the time as well around these issues to get to the core of the issue, because these incredibly what's the kind of word that I'm looking for? These kind of stories that have such a visceral, that engenders a visceral response in people reading them, are very easy to scare people into taking irrational viewpoints, right? Do you see what I mean? In the same way that someone might use examples of some other minority community engaging in violence, and then people on the far right use that to scare like suburban middle class white people into voting for people who are racist, because they say black people can come and ruin your suburb and bring crime with them, because they think that the black people committing crime is because they're black, not because of any kind of socioeconomic reason or confound to that. And yeah, exactly. And the vast majority of rapes happen between people who know each other, rather than just random instances of some person, being spontaneously inspired to commit such a heinous act, right? It's usually the victim usually knows the perpetrator. So it just none of it's borne out with any of the data, unfortunately. But that doesn't matter to the people who they're trying to convince because they're already scared and with good reason. But fear can obscure pragmatism a lot of the time. There are plenty of trans people who are very similar in that regard, who are so scared about the rights that they theoretically could be taken away that anybody who expresses any sort of concern, not like ridiculous turf concern, right? They won't even engage in a discussion about the issues. They just brand them a transphobe or a bigot and don't have the conversation. We lose a lot of people like that. I think that's bad too. Like, there should be discussions that we have. Like, well, no, if you look at the data, trans people aren't a threat. They've never been a threat. We've used these facilities forever. No one's ever complained until it became a moral panic. Please just think about this rationally. But because the concerns come from a genuine place a lot of the time. Because again, as I said, the dealing with societal misogyny is incredibly difficult. And having that framed in a way that implicates trans people incorrectly can cause you to have a visceral reaction that gives you these concerns. And allaying these concerns with reason and with pragmatism and with an understanding is much easier than trying to allay these concerns with vitriol, which a lot of trans people, unfortunately, because they're scared, engage in incorrectly when they shouldn't do that. They shouldn't. They should. I understand it's incredibly difficult. All the trans, I know I have trans fans who watch. I know it's incredibly difficult dealing with the shit that we're dealing with at the moment. We're having to deal with so much societal pressure, but you have to be, if you want to, take steps to make sure that we are emancipated in the way that we need to be. You need to engage in conversation if you can, or not engage in vitriol at the very least, because all it's doing, it doesn't help the situation. Sure, be vitriolic to J.K. Rowling or whatever. I don't really give a shit. Call her every name under the sun that's not explicitly misogynistic that helps them fuel that false narrative, right? If you're mean to her, I don't really care. But people who are trying to be piqued by others of the turf community, you have to let them know that you understand. I think it's incredibly important to start this conversation with, I know misogyny is bad. I know living as a woman in society as it is at the moment is difficult and tough and scary. Because we live it. We live the same threat. We live under the same threat of violence as cis women do. We have to live with that every day. We understand that. And we can empathise with them with regards to that. For trans women. Trans men can understand because, they've lived lives as women previously before transitioning. They understand those issues too. I mean, look, we all have these understanding of what it's like living as a woman in society. But you're not picking fights with the trans people is not where you should be expending your energy. There's plenty of things that we need to fight together to overcome societal misogyny without using trans people as without beating trans people with a stick to get there, right? Because it's not going to help anybody and isn't the root cause of the issue. It's odd how the Catholic Church has escaped a lot of ire despite the actual predatory behaviour that they engage in, right? But I guess there's only little boys that they prey on, and unfortunately there are plenty of TERFs out there who just hate men. I hate such a meme for me to say that, but a lot of it comes from a place of just, again, the level to which they're scared has led to hatred, and then the hatred has been the trans women have caught that hatred by osmosis, right? But yeah, you have to admit, right, when of all the people who's on your side, it's Vladimir Putin, that really should be a cause for concern, a cause for self-reflection of the views that you hold, right? And I fear that there will be no level of introspection from the people that he has decided to endorse, which is sad for what it is, but hey ho. Hopefully, we can try and get the discourse to a place where this shit doesn't happen anymore, but it does feel like we're living in a simulation right now. Not only because we're having potential Supreme Court judges being drilled and interrogated about how they define a woman. I'm just like, why are we living in this fucking timeline? Convinced a lot of TERFs think preying on little boys is okay unless a trans woman does it. I wouldn't be surprised. The way in which that they feel like cis women can never be perpetrators of sexual violence a lot of the time, which is an anti-feminist thing to say. You should, as a feminist, be, willing to grant agency to women to do bad things, right? The idea that women as a class are somehow so precious that they can never have blame attributed to them. That's a patriarchal understanding. of that issue. That is, that is infantilizing women, and again removing their agency to be bad people and to engage in poor behavior. I believe so anyway. And I think proper feminists should understand that. Whilst societal misogyny has led to the rape culture that we live in, where the vast majority of the people who get assaulted are women, and most of the perpetrators are men, that shouldn't negate the other portions of the population who do engage in things that we can call out as well. Yeah, plenty of them will argue that cis women are incapable of being sexually predatory, because it's not about emancipation. It's not about an ideology of changing the world for the better. It's an us versus them fight. It's an us versus them war, where they're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And there's no good and bad actions. There's only good and bad teams, as Sean once put. It was interesting that J.K. Rowling doesn't have any pushbacks on his criticisms of cancel culture, but doesn't have criticisms of who's making the criticisms of cancel culture, because she doesn't think about good and bad actions. She only thinks of good and bad teams. And I don't think it's feminism either. Again, I think you have to grant women agency to do bad things to be a proper feminist, as far as I'm concerned. But that's a pretty far digression. But I really do hope after this we do get some level of self-reflection about the position that these people have taken. Do you look at Suzanne Moore? You look at Suzanne Moore. She's like, how is someone who's supposed to be a Marxist, right? They say a collection of acronyms that mean I'm very special indeed. It's just like calling people the alphabet mafia. How's that any different to the way in which conservatives would criticize the LGBT community? Like, it's so similar. It comes from such a similar place. We've been saying this for ages, and it's just a shame that it's come to a head in the way that it has done, and it's embarrassing that we're having to have discussions about Vladimir Putin and the Wizard Lady. Ridiculous. But anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Ring the bell, that will notify you when I release a new video, and also notify you when I go live. If you click my name down there, it will take you to more videos that you can watch. If you go over here, you can follow me on my socials. Please do. I would like to be able to engage with my fans there. I appreciate your time, and I'll catch you all on the next video.